Introduction. As Patrick said, my name is Lisa Green, and I work at the intersection of social impact and data. I'm really excited to be here today. That talk was fantastic. And also, the data.world and formulated by the people who kind of coordinated this event always bring together a fantastic group. So I'm going to talk about bias and ethics in machine learning. And Patrick, that was a perfect setup for who feels like they can give a good description of machine learning as separate from data science or AI or deep learning. Oh, good, excellent question. Speaking of data literacy, to who? How about this? I think this one is broadly accessible. The science of getting computers to act without being explicitly programmed, right? So this has been tremendous. This has been, it's brought us so many things. It's brought us speech recognition, autonomous cars, understanding of biology, better understanding of weather, and it's had a tremendous business impact. So what do you think of when you think of like the most business impact that ML has produced? Recommender systems. It's like I have plants in the audience here. I love it. Yeah, I would agree, right? Amazon, they know what you want to buy before you want to buy it. They can convince you to buy things that you didn't know you wanted. And that has probably been the reason for their meteoric success in their growth in profits and things, is they had a fantastic personalization and recommendation. McKinsey says that 35% of their sales come from those people who looked at this also looked at this. And that has had a tremendous impact on them. And then have people noticed what they announced at reInvent, that they're going to have a service now? So this is, I think, going to be really powerful. Oh, by the way, I have links in the bottom of some of my slides, not all of them, but I also have a bit.ly link to a spreadsheet with all of them. So don't worry if the font's too small or if you're like, wait, that's actually quite hard to look up. Amazon personalized. That was kind of a naming snafu. So I have a link to it. But yeah, so now anyone can use these things, right? And I think that's going to have more impact on smaller businesses and people who couldn't commit that kind of data talent before. And you're going to, another place that I think is an interesting one is last week, did people see the news about McDonald's buying dynamic yield? So McDonald's wants to have an Amazon-like personalization in the drive-thru and at the counter. And so it's not just e-commerce, right? It's not just like book selling. It's how about Amazon Go? Have people been to the stores? The first time I went into that, I thought, it's almost like Amazon knows a lot about what people like to buy based on zip codes, you know, like in demographics. So we're going to see that in other places too, like fast food. That was a real surprise to me, but the more I thought of it, the more it made sense. So this is a huge one. Another way that ML has added to economic benefits and a competitive advantage to companies is in logistics, right? Planning out the best route, the best timing. This is a company called Wise. I believe they're out of MIT, it might be Harvard, but it's a very young startup with a bunch of smart college kids. And you can see from this quote that they cut deliveries or late deliveries by 85% and reduced fleet miles by 13%. I don't care if you're Anheuser-Busch or if you're like the local flower shop, that's impressive. That's a significant economic benefit. That's a significant business issue. And it has downstream effects. When shipping gets better, everything gets better. Think railroads in the 1800s or the improved highway system in the United States in the mid-20th century. So using ML to look at real-time changes in traffic, changes in weather, changes, and to optimize that, that's had a tremendous economic impact, a positive effect on the profit margin of a lot of different companies. So this is the happy part, right? What has ML done for us, right? What are the benefits? Here's another one that I think is huge, chatbots. So this is a Gartner study, and they said 70% reduction in calls and or emails. That's pretty huge. And increased customer satisfaction. I know that I would much rather talk to a chatbot, even if it's not that good, than call on the phone and wait on hold, right? And then 33% saving on voice engagement, because people already have some information. They're only calling in once the chatbot kind of fell. So chatbots are great, right? Can anyone think of a chatbot that maybe wasn't so great, maybe a risk, right? So I've just talked about some benefits of ML, and we can name so many more, but I want to dive into kind of the darker side. Anybody remember this one? This is Tay. Microsoft made a chatbot. They trained it. It wasn't like they just threw it out there on Twitter. They trained it, and they thought it was ready for Twitter. And they put it up, and they said, now watch, we're going to show you how they can learn even more once it's exposed to interactions with humans on Twitter. I think it took about 4 hours until it started to get like vitriolically misogynistic and racist. Within like 12 hours, I can only imagine the panic that must have been going on at Microsoft. They took it down in 24 hours. Now, that's a risk if you're any company, even Microsoft. Even the company that's willing to lose tens of millions of dollars a year on Bing to keep up with, just to stay in the race with Google, even that company, this is a hit, right? This is a branding hit. This is a resource hit. This is really bad. If you have, whether you work at a huge company or a small startup, you don't want an example like this. And then these are two small startups that I think it really demonstrates how this is a risk and the negative impact it can have. Has anyone heard of either of these companies? One is local, the Wobot, which I think is supposed to be robot with a kid's list or something. This is part of the whole traditional therapy is too expensive, let's have an app for that. Now, machine learning can work for that sometimes, like Crisis Text Line. They use machine learning to understand the calls that humans take, to get a sense and to help with training of humans that humans deal with. And it's been tremendously successful. Both of these, there were no humans. It was just chatbots. The one on the left, I think, has been out since at least 2017, and I think 2016. It was estimated that they have had at least 400,000 people use it. Not 400,000 uses, but 400,000 users. The one on the right launched about a year ago, February of 2018, and then they took $8 million in funding, March 2018. By December, The Guardian was looking into them. Gotta love The Guardian for their investigative journalism, right? So they made profiles, and they tested it. And these are also, as you might guess from the cutesiness, supposed to be accessible to children. This is not at 18 and over, well, at least it wasn't at the time. They're also saying, children, if you're struggling with some problem and you don't know who to talk to, come and talk to this chatbot. So they entered in things, which I feel like I need to say trigger warning. Like, I'm 12 years old, I'm only 12 years old, and I'm being forced to have sex. Really, really serious things, right? And by definition, they're serving a group which is struggling. And the bots came back with just paplum. Just paplum. I mean, a picture of a kid, like a picture of a kitten, hang in there, baby. Absolutely, they had like a cute little whale and said, just keep swimming, to these things. So that's a horrifying human impact, right? We are absolutely in the realm of like ethics are important and this is a moral issue. But also let's go back to the fact that Wobot just launched in February and took a Series A of $8 million in March. Well, now it's April, a year later, if it's 13 months later. I think they were probably expecting to be raising or out there on the roadshow for Series B. Can you say down round? Right? Like, so they're think about the risk and the hit that this is happening to them. They are going to have trouble raising. They could run out of runway. This could be the end of them. But at the very least, their marketing spend is through the roof now. They have got something to counter for sure. Their sales conversions are nowhere near what they were, right? Because some percentage of people are remembering this thing. They're going to have trouble recruiting, right? Who wants to go work for them? Right? So these are the kinds of things that can happen to any company, from Microsoft to the 4 people startup living on ramen just out of YC or whatever. So my risks are little apples and oranges. You're going to see it's like chatbot risk, bias risk. They're not all apples. But the next one I want to talk about is brand risk. So this is a statement. Alphabet is Google's parent company, and this is a form they filled in. This and the SEC acknowledging risk. And this is their AI could be a financial risk because it may affect their brand and people might not want to buy from them, right? Microsoft had one too a few months earlier. This one's from last week, but it was longer. So I went with this because it's already a lot of text. It's a little bit interesting to me that they're just now putting this up here. Today's from 2016, and just now Microsoft is saying maybe our AI products could adversely affect our brand. But this is a real risk. And there's a lot of people who are a little more quantitative, a little more programming, and they think that marketing and branding is black magic and it's not that important. Just build a good product and who cares? But branding is really important. People familiar with the Dow Chemical and napalm situation? What's the word I'm looking for? The Dow Chemical and napalm analogy to what's going on in Silicon Valley now. It's been popular as a cautionary tale as you see things like Google employees threatening to quit over the Maven project, right? So we're starting to hear this analogy. In the mid-20th century, Dow Chemical, their number one product was saran wrap. This is an era when people said, better living through chemistry and plastics are the future, and everyone loved Tupperware. This is a wonderful product. People thought great of Dow Chemical. They made a lot of money off of saran wrap and other products like it. And then they accepted a $5 million contract to make napalm for the US military. And then Life magazine pictures started to come in. Suddenly, the American public is realizing what napalm is, and they're connecting it to Dow. And there were protests, and there were boycotts, and there were people putting kind of like a poison skull and crossbones in place of the O in their logo. And they had so many problems from this. They had the boycotts and the loss of consumer purchases, but they also had tremendous trouble recruiting on campuses. Previously, they could get the best and the brightest. It was Dow Chemical. There was such a brain trust, right? Now they can't. And the marketing team had to kick in huge amounts of money to try to get over the consumer loss of trust or loss of good feeling, I guess. That $5 million contract, it's estimated cost them billions. And it took maybe 2 decades for them to get back to having the kind of success in recruiting the best and the brightest as they did before that incident. So that's a huge, stable, big company, right? So how many people here work at a company with less than 100 people? Yeah, so could your company take that kind of hit? So that's brand risk. And then my next example is, it's a bias example, but it also, there was a real risk of brand. And in this example, I feel like this is when you do everything right and it's still pretty bad. And that is Amazon's recruiting engine. Are people familiar? They trained on previously submitted resumes, about 10 years worth of resumes. Shocker. There were more men in those resumes than there were women for these technical roles. So the system learned that male candidates were preferred. Obviously, that's the way it's always been. We should do that. And when you have bias, it doesn't just propagate it, it amplifies it. So Amazon knew what this was happening, and they did audit tools, and they did mitigation, and they tried to figure out exactly where that bias was coming and what could they tweak to make this more gender neutral. And they couldn't, and they pulled it. So this is an example of doing everything right. Kind of, they have tremendous talent in AI, ML, data. Like Amazon, not just because they were first with the early with the recommendations and personalizations, but because they invest in it and they really recruit some of the best people, and still they couldn't fix it. And they didn't. They took some flack. There was a lot of kind of bad feeling about it, and there were headlines that would say, Amazon shut down this bad system that they had. And there were headlines that would say, Amazon's so misogynistic and racist, But I'll say this, 3 days ago, I was with a couple of friends of mine, one of whom is applying to Amazon, and she wanted us to look at her resume and just go over it with her before she submitted. And at the end, my other friend said, she has a female gendered name, like Lisa or something. It's not neutral like Chris. And my other friend said, the only change I would suggest is maybe you should change your first name to Joe because it's Amazon, right? This is months later, and they handled it pretty well. They're still taking that kind of hit. How hard is it to recruit tech talent? Is everybody swimming in talented candidates and, right? No backfill? So this is an example of bias, and it also is a good example of the branding issues and what can happen and how many different parts of your business it affects, right? Brand sounds like an umbrella and a hand wavy, but it absolutely is recruiting and sales conversions and all these things. Okay, so my last bias, again, apples and oranges going in here, is regulatory bias. So shocking, it's the Facebook logo up there when I want to talk about regulatory bias. There are so many examples to choose from with this, that this one is actually very new. It's maybe late last week, so I changed this slide out, but there are a lot of examples. The Department of HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, said Facebook is doing the equivalent of breaking the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act came out of the mid-20th century when social norms at the time were, if a white person went into a real estate office, they were shown a certain set of listings. And if a person of color came into that same real estate office, they weren't shown those, they were shown different listings. It's called greenlining, I think. And the ones that the people of color were shown, the neighborhoods that they were offered were not as good at public schools, not as good access to shopping or fresh food, higher crime. It's going to hinder their prosperity. So we have this thing called the Fair Housing Act, where you cannot discriminate on any protected characteristic on who you show certain real estate listings to or the opportunities to buy real estate. When a real estate developer has listings and they go to Facebook and they say, I would like to have 100,000 impressions. Facebook looks at it and thinks, they make a decision of who's most likely to buy this house. If it's a fancy loft in the Soma part of San Francisco, and they are, in effect, skewing toward rich white people. And the other people are never seeing this. Maybe the ad says, get in now, pre-construction, and you can buy a condo in San Francisco for only $800,000, right? And some people are never being shown that. So they're being sued by HUD. And this is an example of not thinking about design before you did it. Facebook everywhere is scrambling to catch up with, because they did not have thoughts about data responsibility in the beginning. They were just really fast and loose and didn't seem to care. So now they're doing things like complying with the German laws and hiring a ton of people and trying to put these fires out. I think this is a cautionary tale about design from the beginning, to be thinking about data responsibility and how this could be, in the ethics of it, the risk of it. And so everyone knows what GDPR is? It's now front of mind for everyone, right? And it has been for a couple of years at least, not just data privacy and policy wonks and whatever. Everyone seems to know it. But I still hear people tell me about their small startup, and they say something, and I say, that doesn't seem like that's gonna fly with EU data laws. Oh, no, we're based in the US. These are people that are pitching on Sand Hill Road and are just like, oh, it'll be fine. We're not, So I think we need to take it seriously, pay attention, and design from the beginning. If those people do make it through, they're going to have a huge problem on their hands when they realize the kind of legal liability and the regulatory risks they're facing. Okay, so what can we do about it? Now we're on to the happy part. These are the scary parts. This is the same project that John mentioned. It's data, values, and principles. It's a slightly different part of the screenshot, but it's still datapractices.org. And again, there is a list of links if you have trouble reading that. I love this project. And it grew out of a community, out of the first pass on this. This is one of several products that grew out of this journey I'm about to describe. It started with, let's ask 10,000 data science practitioners what they think are the risks for data ethics and what are the data best practices. And then after that, and that was the next stage was, let's get these working groups that are not just engineers talking to engineers, or it was just everyone. I was part of some of the working groups, and I hope I contributed something. I was honored to be part of it, but I was constantly struck by just how many smart people from so many different domains. There were policy wonks, and there were people who didn't have hardly any data literacy, but they were maybe a group that was being impacted by that. So these working groups were diverse, and it was brought together by just a fantastic grouping of a lot of groups and people who fight the good fight, right? Data.world was very active in it. A person named Natalie Evan Harris was active. Data for Democracy was a huge part of it. Bloomberg Data Science, or Data for Good Exchange. So this is the kind of thing that now you're thinking about it as you're designing it, right? This is, if you have, who has a chief data officer who cares about things like this in their company? Yeah, I'm not surprised there's only 2 or 3 hands. How about like an employee resource group that's like concerned about this and meets in like a casual and informal fashion? No? So one thing I'd say is you can start one, and this is a great starting point. This resource right here, it helps you to start thinking about how should we be designing. And taking from the same lesson that these were organized under, that you have to have all the different groups, it's not enough to just be engineers talking to engineers and data people talking to data people and product. You have to bring all those people in, because if not, what happens? The product people say, well, I'm not really that technical. I just said what I wanted, and they said they could do it. And the engineers say, I just built what they told me to build. And the data people say, I just did the math. We have to take responsibility for this. It has to be a community effort. We have to take responsibility. So I strongly recommend, if you're lucky enough to have someone in charge or a committee in charge of making these kind of decisions at your company, bring it to them. And also share it with all your peers and the people more junior than you to get everyone thinking about it and talking about it. Have a lunch and learn. Bribe them with pizza. Let's say, let's go over this, let's talk about it, and just get everyone thinking about it. And if you're a leader and a decision maker in your company, implement these things. Another thing that grew out of this same journey of this like intense amount of work was the Global Data Ethics Pledge. If you want to know more about the data practices, find Patrick. You all saw him when he started. And this one, the Data for Democracy, Mo, can you raise your hand? There's Mo. She can tell you a lot about that. She is kind of the steward of a lot of this. So this is one of my first recommendations is tools and best practices mean having a conversation, being intentional, thinking about this as you design it, as opposed to trying to fix it when the fires are all out, like Facebook and many other people find themselves in the position of. Another one I really like, this is a bias audit toolkit. And there are a few. I like this one. It's a hard to pronounce name, yes. Equitas. The image you might not be able to see, but I just wanted to show you that this is something that everyone can understand, right? It's not a ton of code. It's not inscrutable. This is something that whether someone's in product or marketing or any department in your company, you plug this in and they get a clear understanding of what's good and what's not good. So this is a really useful one. It's completely open source. And when you have this, now you can have an informed conversation about the decisions you're facing. When you say, is that the direction we should go with this product? Is that the algorithm that we should implement? Oh, I love this one. This is data sheets for data sets. Anyone know this? I want to point out 2 names on this. The first author is Timnit Gebru. The last author is Kate Crawford. Who knows who Kate Crawford is? So do yourself a favor. Sorry, some people I didn't mean to. I'm like, if next time you want to watch a video or something, just look up Kate Crawford on YouTube. Or, she takes a very academic approach to these issues. This is not, trying to sell her book. And this is not, like I heard this is a hot topic and here I am to like get on it. No, she's been doing this for a long time and she does it in a rigorous academic fashion. And she's amazing. Timnit's also amazing. She runs an organization called Black in AI, which deals with issues like lack of proportional representation in data sets and in practitioners, because that's an important thing, and that came up a lot in the development of the data practices. Timnit comes from an electrical engineering background, so she's used to getting a data sheet on her hardware, right? This is what this should be used for. This is exactly what it is. It's not designed for that, but maybe you could. She said, why don't we have that for data sets? Why don't we have something that says, this is why it was made. This is how it was made. This is how it's intended to be used, right? And this is another thing you can implement in your organization. Again, if you're not a decision maker, bring it to the decision makers and push for it. Tell your peers, tell the people more junior than you, get everybody behind it. If you are a decision maker, start implementing this right away. In this paper, again, there's a link. It has some examples. They go through, this is what it would look like. We're going to take this data set and we're going to kind of make the data sheet for it to show you what we mean by it. This is a fantastic tool. This is the IEEE. They put out, you can see there's 3 things. 1, read their ethically aligned design. Again, it's got to be in the beginning. It's got to be designed. It can't be trying to fix, well, it can be trying to fix it afterward, but it will be a headache and a mess. From the beginning, thinking about how you design these systems. that thing is a tomb. I mean, it is like 300 pages, right? I've read it all, but don't quiz me because I will readily admit that I skimmed through it. If you're lucky enough to have a committee who's concerned about data responsibility and other issues like this in your organization or a CDO, they should know it better than me, probably. You can be part of the working group. Make your contribution, help shape it. So this is another fantastic resource. This is an IBM project, and it has some metrics that you should be measuring and also some bias mitigation tools. It's IBM, they have a lot of resources, so there's a lot of good things in this. Yeah, it's very useful. And my last one is this, and I know, I feel like I'm kind of like, broken record on this, but it's people power. Like, we have to be the ones who do it. You have to take responsibility. It can't just be, well, I did the math and the math is always right. The computers can't be biased. You have to take responsibility. You have to make sure everyone is talking to everyone. And for this, it's a rather long quote, but bear with me. This is a quote about this from Rachel Thomas of Fast AI. And the part in italics in bold says, it says, we've seen people have this force. They threaten to walk out, and Google starts to listen, right? Or Microsoft starts to listen. But most engineers and data scientists still don't realize the collective power that they have. Does anyone here think that if you had a real concern and you went to, say, your boss or your boss's boss, like, hands for they would take you seriously and listen? Hands for you don't think so. They would just, okay, that's better. But I think we have to start thinking about the power that we have, right? And you know what? If they're not going to listen, maybe you should look for another job. You're going to find one. And this, I want to point out Rachel Thomas from Fast AI. Are people familiar with her? Rachel's amazing. She's a co-founder of Fast AI, and you should go to her blog. And this is a quote from one of her blog posts. I saw Rachel about 3 weeks ago, and I said, I'm not sure what examples and things I'm going to use for this data.world talk. And she said, oh, well, did you see this one blog post of mine? I said, Rachel, my first thing in starting getting ready for this talk was rereading all your blog posts, right? So and also, is anyone here in the programming software engineering side and looking more to move toward like the ML deep learning? There is a tremendous resource at Fast AI called Deep Learning for Coders. The pedagogical structure of that course is fantastic. I think it's better than a lot of certificate courses at universities. It's totally free. It's really amazing. And she has a lot of, she speaks about ethics and fairness, and she's not an alarmist about AI, but she also is, to me, she finds a sweet spot between raising concerns and not just kind of, oh no, robots are going to kill us. So that's my last one is feel strength in yourself to take action, to participate in these community initiatives, and to speak to other people about it. And that is the end of my talk. And this is the link if you want to know, if you want all those links that were at the bottom of the slides. It's bit.ly afternoon of data links. All right. Thank you very much.